Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and those of you still on the fence, welcome back to another episode of Derailed, courtesy of Archaic Skids. I'm, of course, your host, Archaic Skids. We have with us Liberty Down Under and the hairy-chested Libertarian, who doesn't know how to shave. Neither do I, so that's fine. But we do have Babyface for all of you to check out. We have an interesting conversation that we are going to have today where we are going to talk about Christianity and faith in the Libertarian Party. Let's start with Liberty Down Under. Introduce yourself real quick and tell people where you stand.
Hi, so I am a Australian Baptist, so a bit different to the Southern Baptists, but a lot like some of the other Baptists you have in America. And I'm a big believer in the idea that Christianity and libertarianism intersect on most ideas, if not all.
Nice. Hairy-chested Libertarian.
Aaron, yeah. So I actually grew up in the Baptist church. I'm a PK. My dad's pastor, well, retired now, but have grown up in the Baptist church, went to Christian college, Christian school, or homeschooled my whole life. I'm now a Presbyterian, Reformed theology. But one of the things that drew me to libertarian philosophy really was it mirrored my faith the most closely. I felt like it made me it allows for the most freedom to be what Christ intended for his followers to be.
Nice. I've never been asked on a podcast. I've also never brought it up, but just anyone that watches this that cares, I was originally Southern Baptist. That's how I was raised. And then, same as Paul over there. I was made a switch when I was about 15, I guess. And it fit a lot better for me. Like there was a little more to it. So let's just get right into it, guys. We're gonna start with Paul on this one. There are in my opinion, outnumbering, or maybe that's the wrong term. Statistically, there are way more atheists, it seems, in the Libertarian Party than any other political party, at least in America. I don't know about Australia. We'll get into that. But in America, it seems like to be libertarian or anarchist, you almost have to be atheist. What are your thoughts on that? And also, why is it absolutely not accurate?
Well, so funny thing was, before I hopped on this one, I was actually right in the middle of an anarchist Bible study. There's a group out there. There are 3 anarchists that hold a Bible study, and they talk about Bible passages that deal with government, that deal with money. And so there are the Christians out there. It's hard to tell. I mean, unless I saw some cold hard numbers, it's hard to tell if there are more. Atheists like CrossFitters and vegans are usually very vocal about what they believe. Having been an atheist,
or don't believe,
right. I was actually an atheist myself for several years. Growing up in the church, and being the kind of learner that I was, I wanted to ask questions. And the sort of flavor of Baptist church that I grew up in did not always reward the question askers. So I became disillusioned with Christianity when I was in college. The only thing I was trained to do was to be in Christian schools, to teach in Christian environment. So for several years after, at the end of grad school and then while working in these Christian schools, I was actually an atheist. I did not believe God existed, or that if he did, he would show himself to me. So just, the long answer to that first part, I think that there are a lot more Christians in the liberty movement than we give credit for. Atheists just in general tend to be a lot more vocal about it. But something that I found with a lot of the atheists, because I'm friendly with several atheists online, and we have some great conversations about it. A lot of it, I'm sensing like there's this disproportionate number of people that are driven to atheism, not because they believe God doesn't exist, but because they've experienced a church hurt. There's a big power differential, especially in our modern Western churches now, where you have this very strong central figure, the pastor, and what he says reigns supreme. Or, he's got these deacons that surround him, or elders that will surround him, keep him from any criticism. And if you raise your hand and say, hey, I don't agree with this, or could you explain this decision, they tend to run you out of church. And I mean, I think every Christian either has a church story or is going to have a church story. I put my church story on my YouTube channel of church abuse. So atheism, a lot of these atheists who have had church hurt like this, I think many of them are drawn to libertarianism because we are, in a sense, anti-authoritarian. Like, we believe that authority in a political sense rests with the individual. Now, obviously, as a Christian, I believe that God is sovereign over all. God is the final authority. But I keep my faith and my politics fairly separate. One is earthly and temporal, and one is eternal. I would, most of my discussions with atheists, I think they are drawn to libertarianism because it's anti-authoritarian, whereas as a Christian, I am drawn to it because it leaves everything up to personal choice. You don't have to pretend to be anything you don't want to be. You smoke whatever, you inject whatever, you do whatever. Now it's my job as a Christian to tell you about the saving power of the gospel and the eternal consequences joyously of accepting Christ as your Savior. But it's not out of coercion. It is completely your choice, which is as God intended it.
Free will. All right. You up, mate? What do you got? Add to that, or add your own?
I look a lot at the Bible and use that to try and back up my libertarian beliefs. So, for example, we look at 1 Samuel 8, which a lot of Christians know as the time when the people asked Samuel, give us a king, and Samuel said, okay. But what people don't focus on is the fact that at the same time, Samuel goes to God and says, what do I do? And God says, if they want a king, let them deal with the results of it. Like, that's going to be bad for them. They want to be like other countries, but if they want a king, it's their personal choice. Let them deal with it. Then we had 3 kings. We had Saul, David, and I'm having a mental blank.
Solomon.
Yeah, Solomon, yes.
Solomon.
And then after that, it started going downhill. We had it split between 2 of Solomon's sons, and this kept getting worse and worse. And then the land shrunk during the whole time. However, before that, we look at the book of Judges, and to an extent as well, and we see that it's run by like people who are just elders in society. Basically, they're not appointed by anyone except by God. They don't, like, the military is basically a militia, a well-regulated militia, you could almost say. It's only created in times of defense. They're not aggressively expanding. They're peacefully trading with other countries. So I look at that, and I see that as a model for how society should run. Instead of what we have after that, where we have the monarchy and then it collapses, and then the Roman Empire and the Greeks and the Egyptians, and just constantly being oppressed by other countries.
Sure.
Yeah, and an interesting take on that. Many Christians will quote Romans 13, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and a lot of them, especially in the more Republican areas, will try to use the verse in Romans to say, well, they take that by itself out of context, and they never parallel that with the 1 Samuel or 1 Samuel 8 passage, where God is not saying that having a king is prescriptive. This is not what he's prescribing. This is a descriptive thing. This is basically the result of a very immature, selfish group of people who did not like to be self-governed because the consequences were too great. In that society, when everybody was doing what was, well, so previously, this is, the time when everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. I'm sorry, no, that's later. Basically, they did not like living under this sort of, it was about as close, I think, to anarchy as you can possibly get, where yes, you did have some of these civil magistrates that had prescribed ways of dealing with problems, governed by the church. And remember, their entire community was wrapped up in the church, so that if you killed someone's livestock, even if it was on accident, we have an entire book and a half in the Bible that describes what you're supposed to be doing with this. But by and large, it was live and let live. And the only reason, as they digressed further into a sinful lifestyle, that's when they began wanting a government or a state. Take that for what it's worth.
Yes.
I agree with that. One of the funniest things to me is that there are a huge amount of historical books you can read, but these are they're not based on historical fact. It's essentially someone looking at history and saying, well, this, that, or the other, right? One of the things that is written, I believe, in the Catechism was that Louis XIV at one point said, I am king ordained by God. And I always found that interesting, because I'm like, no, you're not. You're ordained by man, not by God. And it goes back to that, well, I want a king. And, God went, well, if that's what they want. It didn't mean that he was in any way saying, well, they should have a king. It was just like, well, if these morons want to go down that road, let them. Like, it's whatever, that's free will, essentially. But the monarchies have often used that, especially from Catholicism, that we're ordained by God, and therein we are, beyond reproach. And it's like, no. That's not really accurate. We look at, what was it, Henry VIII or whatever, how many wives did he kill? That he 7. Yeah. I mean, this is
No, he had 6. He killed I think 4 of them.
Okay.
Oh, okay,
he had 6 and killed 4. One outlived him, and I think one got divorced.
That's right.
But the rest he had killed in
his
some
first one,
Yeah.
right? He divorced his first one.
Yes.
And then, yeah, okay. So she was,
And he
I believe, like a Spanish princess or something.
Yes.
Much older than him.
Spanish princess, yes.
Catherine, I believe, was her name.
Catherine of Aragon.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so I don't know why we're going down this historical run, but it is called Derailed, so whatever. My point being is that religion has been used throughout history by people in positions of power to gain more power. And I would make the argument that the libertarian motto of you don't harm me and you don't take my things, we can trade freely, we can do whatever we see fit in that regard, actually fits a lot better with even Christ's teachings, right? Of you can help your neighbor, but don't take from your neighbor without, by force, essentially. I think that's 100% libertarian.
Yeah, it is. Definitely agreed.
I don't know. Paul's looking at us like we're both high. So
No. To an extent, I agree. Again, coming at this from a Christian perspective, where we believe that all men are sinful beings. We are born in sin. Ever since the fall of Adam, all men have been born in sin, and so our natural state before being redeemed by the power of the gospel, our natural state is always going to be towards sin. And so in a libertarian society, you have to start, yes, from a standpoint of people are free to do what they want, but I believe in order for libertarianism and anarchy to be truly successful, you need a Judeo-Christian value. It can't be something that you enforce at point of a gun. Constantine tried that, didn't do.
That kind of blew up in his face a little bit.
Yeah. And so when you look at the teachings of Christ, I mean, one of the most beautiful things, every time people say, well, what about the poor people? What about the roads? What about the this? Libertarians are always getting questions asked about this, and we say, well, there's going to be charity. Well, what if nobody gives? People are coming back. When you look at the prescriptive, what
they just gave $100,000 to AOC's grandma or whatever, which then she said, I don't want your money. It's like, well, what about your grandma? Did you ask her?
But when you get to what Christ, how the Bible describes religion, they say religion is this. It is to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and to keep yourself unspotted from the world. One of the things I like to do whenever I go on podcasts is say, there's a difference between liberty and libertine. Liberty is the freedom to do something, but you self-regulate because it's not healthy. Libertine is, I can do it, so I guess I'm just going to go. In a libertarian society, you are free to be a libertine, but I, as a Christian, am going to try to convince you of a better way, obviously through the lens of the gospel and through the lens of the Bible. But ultimately, in order for a libertarian society, or anarchist society for that matter, to be successful, you must have a self-regulating principle. And one of the things the atheists just don't seem to have, at least I've not heard a good argument for it, is a good reason why they should self-regulate. And I think this is the biggest divide between the Christian world and the atheist world in a libertarian-driven society. Liberty, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I agree. We need some sort of objective basis to have a moral society, because you need to have, like, even if you, like, obviously the state can't legislate morality, but you need some sort of underlying morals that will give everyone like certain beliefs to follow, and you can't do that through atheism because it's very relativist. To the very extreme example of relativism is that you can't criticize anyone for having any different beliefs to you, because everyone is different and morals are different for every person. Like, if you take that stance, then even the non-aggression principle, it's an objective principle. You can't, like, if you take a relativist stance to that, then you can't even apply that everywhere. You have the golden rule. You can't apply that everywhere. You need some sort of underlying principle to give you some sort of moral guidance in how you conduct yourself.
Yeah.
Even if it's not Judeo-Christian, as long as you have some sort of underlying religion in your society, like, it's better than having nothing.
Correct. Yeah. Especially a lot of the religions out there, they would have many good teachings. Now, I don't think that those teachings are a substitute for, entrance into heaven and peace with the Father. However, an interesting thing I heard tonight on this anarchist Bible study, I asked the question, I said, so how does an anarchist Bible, or how does an anarchist society lend itself towards Christianity? And I thought that the answer was brilliant. They said, well, in an anarchist society, it goes back to like the foundation of the family, where people who are religious, those who follow golden rule, that follow biblical principles, this is going to be a very solid society. Whereas people who live in a sort of libertine lifestyle, which is a thing that people will do if when given that choice, said that will crumble very quickly. All throughout history, we've seen this, where as soon as, we'll go back to Louis XIV, the sun god, who, yes, thought that he was, or the sun king, thought that he was deity himself, was built on the back of this massive empire, tons of riches, fell into decadence. And I mean, my history is so bad. I have a minor in it. I should know more. But France, of course, descended into absolute chaos, and I would even argue has not really come out of it once they began rejecting those Judeo-Christian values, even of the Catholic Church, such as it were, where it's now, I think it's a majority atheist country. The religion is kind of a dying breed there with their cathedrals.
Well, I look at, for example, England under the Tudors. Even though Mary was Catholic, they still, versus the rest who were Protestant, and I know we're a Protestant here. Even then, they still had that stability. Whereas you go to the Stuarts, who were the next family to rule, James VI, pretty good, but then Charles I down. They had a very much an absolutist monarchy system where the monarch was ordained by God and had absolute power, and they went down. the only time England has ever been ruled by someone other than a king was after when Charles I was executed for treason by Parliament, because he was saying that I'm ordained by God, I can do whatever I want.
Mm.
That's the only time England's ever been a republic, is because they rejected those Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah, which, I mean, and let's be honest, leaders, kings, pharaohs, czars, whatever, throughout all of history have claimed deity. I'm reading a book on cosmological ontology right now.
I'm gonna be right back, guys. You guys keep doing this. This is
okay.
awesome.
Sure. About cosmological ontology, and they're bringing in Babylonian literature, and even back then, all of the kings would say, "Yes, I was instituted by the church." And right now in the Western Church, I used to work in the megachurch world, so I would regularly write music and conduct crowds of 10 to 12,000 people, this giant. I enjoyed a lot of celebrity, but by the time I got out of it and sort of got my church hurt story, I realized that in a position where there's that many people that willingly give up sort of control of their life to a central figure like the pastor, the people who are drawn to that tend to be like politicians. They enjoy the power a bit too much. And so, sadly, the church has not always been a sterling example of keeping power at bay. But again, that just goes back to the very beginning, where God did not intend us to live this way. Back to the First Samuel passage. You want a king? All right, you're going to get a king, but you've got everything that goes with it. And we get a little bit of freedom, and even here in America, where we started out with a relatively large amount of freedom, and then people began desiring a king. I think that's the sinful state of man, to desire some sort of leadership that we think is going to take away our personal responsibility.
Yes, agreed. That's Lord Acton, power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. So
And sadly, we've seen them in the church. Look at that, for example, Joel Osteen, for example.
yeah.
He might have started off with the good intentions, but prosperity gospel, give me your wealth, power corrupts, and now he's a multi-million dollar millionaire, and he gets away with it because he has the power in the church.
Yeah, and that church, I mean, just down in Houston, like, there is so much abuse happening in it. Even my church, which was nowhere near the size of that one, when you start digging away at the layers, what little power was there just absolutely, I mean, it was kind of like you were reading Lord of the Rings, and all of a sudden you have this ring somewhere, and everybody was getting it as they got a hold of it. As soon as they got that little bit of power, it corrupted even to myself. In fact, one of the stories that I tell, I was the orchestra conductor. I wrote, arranged, orchestrated for it, and then I conducted the orchestra. And I was so obsessed with my church. Like, my church actually became my God, small g God. And I served my God very faithfully, and gave a lot of my blood, sweat, and tears to the God. But the thing was, humans, the only place that humans took were more like human sacrifice. Whatever would take time away from my God, I rejected it. So one of my players came up to me one time in between a service, and she said, "Hey, I'm going to have to miss the next couple of weeks. I'm getting a divorce." And the very first thing that popped into my head was not, "Oh, I'm sorry, what's going on?" The very first thing that popped into my head was, "Okay, you're a second violin. I can replace you." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, well, just come back when you can. It's great." I had completely divorced her humanity. And this is getting to a point, completely divorced her humanity from her. She had a spiritual need. She had hurt. She was an individual. I only saw her as a collective because of my position of authority. I had another purpose in mind. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but I know here in America, we're fighting so many wars. The politicians are spending the lives of our military like they're Chuck E. Cheese tokens. Like, Go to Dave and Buster's and buy a decoder ring. Like, our people are getting slaughtered. We're killing people left and right. And when you get into this position of authority, you strip away the humanity of the people that you're dealing with. And I think that is one of the true curses of the state, of government. And I think you could even argue why God never intended us to live in that sort of environment.
I have a question. I have a question before you answer there, down under. Is it that when they get in that position of authority, they see people that way, or do they get in that position because they already see people that way, and so they're able to just lie through their teeth like they do to get elected? Because they don't really care about people. They just get told, hey, say this thing, say that thing, make the people applaud and clap and call you queen, like, my favorite politician, AOC.
So I don't think that you could say it's always one or the other. Some may get in with good intentions and then be spoiled after they get it. I don't know if you heard my Lord of the Rings analogy, but some of them get in there, they get the ring of power, and it corrupts them. In the church world, in fact, this is a scriptural term. They have a name for people who seek power and seek to hurt people in a church, and they're called wolves. And oftentimes they're described as dressing in sheep's clothing so they can get close to the people that they want to feed off of. So ultimately, their goal is the death of not all the sheep, because they still got to eat, but some of them would go in either with those intentions. They just want to get rich. Church is big money. Politics is big money. Or they get in and they're corrupted. Liberty, is that your...
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a mixture of both.
Well, that you basically just described every pastor of a mega church I've ever met anyway, but like, I'm sorry, let's talk about that real quick, because that's one of, and I think it's a pretty good argument that gets made. You have these mega churches, a lot of them are like NBA arenas that get bought by a church, and then they fill them up and they give these big passionate speeches, and they've got all the lights, and you might as well be at a concert essentially, right, for this thing. And these guys fly around on private jets, and they have 15 houses, and then it's almost inevitable that something terrible is going to come out about this person. And it's like, what, they're just adding fuel. Why? Okay, here's the question, and this question goes to both of you. We're going to start with Liberty Down Under here and his ideology on it. When these things happen, and they unfortunately happen too often, why is it that faithful people, Christians or whatever, are drawn so much? Is it the sports ideology of that causes these massive mega churches to be as successful financially as they are, that then always blow up? Or is there a way to go, hey, look, your local neighborhood church, like your local neighborhood government, would be better? Is there a way to convince Christians to kind of pull back from that? Or is that something that we just go, do whatever you want, and then when he turns out to be a pedo, then we go, oops?
So I can't comment on this too much because I live in more regional Australia where we don't have mega churches as much to start with, and even less so where I am. But from what I've seen, typically the pastor will start off being really good, which is why the church grows so much. And then because the church has grown, it attracts more people because people know people who go there, so they go there because they know people, and B, because it becomes like an institution. It's like, let's go to the big church in town while we're here, and then people go visit the big church, and then they give money to it. And so like they start off pretty well, but then over time, especially in churches where like the pastor dies and his son takes over, for example, which then happens a few times, then the original ideas of it slowly get eroded as time goes on, and it slowly becomes more and more just a money-making machine, which is quite unchristian-like, because we're called to, if we have excess money, to share that money and look after the poor, and make sure that we're looking after everyone in the community, the widows, orphans, and foreigners. And we're called to do that, and we're called to use money that we have, that we, instead of spending it on ourselves, we're called to spend it on other people. And as you were saying before, Paul, these people with these jets flying around everywhere, like they spend the money on the community instead of using it to plant. Like, some of them use it to plant more churches, which is good to an extent, but a lot of the time it's used just on themselves, especially with prosperity gospel churches, from what I've seen.
Yeah.
So I can answer a little bit more to this, because, again, having been in the megachurch world, I described it as this. It's sort of like the snake that eats itself. And I need to look up, what is this, it's the name of an Egypt. What's that snake called? The one that's eating its own tail. I
don't know what you're talking about.
It's either a Greek or an Egyptian name. Anyway, so the church gets big. It could be because the pastor writes a best-selling book, or he has something where people are drawn to him, and then they come in. So you have to build a big building so people can come in there. Well, then, mega churches are a revolving door. You get lots of people coming in, you get lots of people going out. Well, to get more people to come in to pay for the building, you have to have new programs. And then hire a pastor to be over that program, and then more people come in, so then more people are leaving. So basically, you just keep building the church bigger so you can get more people in to pay for the thing that you've got. And oftentimes the actual work of the church is not seen as important. In my former church specifically, we had an $18.5 million budget to work with. And when we broke the budget down, 5% went into savings, and then after you paid for utilities and everybody's salaries and what have you, the work of the church, which would have been community outreach, and missions, got 5% of the budget. But when you looked at the asterisk, salaries came out of that as well for the people who worked on staff there, so that less than 5% of this $18.5 million budget actually went to the work of the church. Well, when you get up there and you say, hey, we've spent close to $500,000 helping the community, everyone gasps, oh my goodness, that's great. And then to keep coming, they hire people like me, whose job it was to write the show. Like, I'm the one who's got, you got to make the church sparkle. You give it that distinctive where people want to come hear it. And in the end, this is, I believe, where a lot of atheists are made, because they look at this and they see this very coercive government. And what's worse is people are voluntarily being a part of this abusive situation. And they say, well, if that's what their God is looking for, like to basically voluntarily prop up a king, why would I want any bit of that? And kind of like we joke about, you're not a real libertarian. I will have to say, as a Christian, it does get tiring sometimes to say, no, this is not the purpose of the church. This is not what the church was made to do. And if the church would be the church, we wouldn't need a government, because we would be feeding the homeless. We would be caring for the fatherless and the widows and the foreigners. We wouldn't, the government wouldn't have to do they don't have to do these things, but that's where we would step in. And that is what the Bible prescribes us to do. Everything that a libertarian say, this is what would need to happen in order for our society to flourish. This is what the Bible is saying. If you love me being Christ, keep my commandments. What are his commandments? To feed the poor, to visit the fatherless and the widow, to care for the foreigner. So this is why I'm saying you really have to have that Judeo-Christian value in order to make a libertarian society truly thrive. And again, atheism kind of comes up short in that, well, not really. I mean, they could say, well, we want society to thrive, so we would need to do this. But then they have, I don't know, there just doesn't seem to be a good explanation for why they would continue caring for the poor and the widow and the fatherless and all of that. That's a very bad argument.
One of the arguments that I've heard from pretty high level atheists who are also extraordinarily smart people and also very good people by all accounts is that you do not need God or Christianity for morality, which, okay, I mean, you can make that argument, except for all the people that make that argument grew up in societies that are Judeo-Christian societies. And so their morality was built out of that argument from the get-go, right? So they can be over here and be, I'm an atheist and I don't have to believe in God in order to be moral and to be just and to and not harm others and be a good person. But they were raised from a framework that is 100% built on Judeo-Christian values, as like the West has been built on. Now, rather than
it's a bit of herd immunity in a sense, because in the sense that you, like, one person can decide to not be vaccinated and the rest of the society is vaccinated, so they benefit from the herd immunity. So it's the same with Christianity. Like if enough members of society are Christian or Jewish, then everyone benefits from their same societal beliefs because they influence society's values, and then everyone else benefits from that. So in a sense, that's how it operates. You don't have to necessarily be a Christian or a Jew to still benefit from society's beliefs that are Judeo-Christian, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
that's a very interesting way to look at it. It's herd immunity. I like that. Like,
yeah. And then, of course, morality, it's such an interesting term. I mean, again, and I had these conversations and these arguments back during my atheist days as well. But the tough part when I was an atheist was, if I wanted to do something, that was quote unquote immoral. Well, by what standard would I say, no, I don't get to do that? I can sleep with whoever I want to sleep with, because why wouldn't I? I am my own sense of morality. And the problem is when you get people with differing senses of morality, you can't, it's hard to make judgment calls. You can't do that. That's not good. Well, you can't have the word good without the Bible, without Christ. The very nature of the word is religious. So to truly be an atheist, where you truly live as if God doesn't exist, you really have no space to sit and say socialism is bad. It's not bad. It's just a different set of choices. Someone wants to enslave people. That's not bad. It's just their preference to enslave someone. You take away the very thing that makes humans not sovereign in the sense that God is sovereign, but you take away the very thing that makes humans human, like our imago Dei, our image of God, the thing that gives us worth. Once you take that away, then it's a moot conversation. There's no reason not to be communist, and the survival of the fittest and the strongest one wins and all the other Darwinian phrases, those all make sense in a godless society. It's only in a society where there's a moral guiding principle of religion to keep it on track.
I agree with that 100%. I want to switch gears just a little. We're not going to switch gears because we're going to stay on the religion topic, but I do want to switch gears in one regard, is that I view critical theory, I'm not going to call it race or whatever, because it encompasses so many things, rather that be sex theory, race theory, whatever. It encompasses just this huge amount of, well, realistically, the West in general, and Australia, because Australia being America's little brother, they get caught up in all our nonsense too. But it encompasses all this crazy shit that we're dealing with. I literally see it as a religion, like the way that they push it forward. They have their little prayer meetings. I mean, that's basically what it is. Like we saw right immediately after George Floyd, people washing people's feet. Like that is okay. From my perspective as a devout Christian, I was like, oh wow, where's the lightning that needs to be striking at this moment, right? Because it was in my head very blasphemous what they were doing. But also, I can't really say that because in the Middle East, that's actually just a sign of respect, right? It's not a matter of their godly. But I do see this thing as religious. I know a lot of people say, well, they're in a cult. And I'm like, they're in a religion at this point. Like, this is a religion. And I want to get both of your thoughts on that. Let's start with Paul on this one. Paul, what are your thoughts? Is it a religion or is it a cult kind of is a religion? It depends on how you look at it.
Well, it is a religion. And again, one of the things that kind of brought me out of atheism and back into Christianity is the idea of, what faith is. Ultimately, it all comes down to what God you're going to serve. And we cannot but help serve a God. It is the human condition that we will serve something. Now, you can make yourself that God, that you are the highest standard. You can make an ideal a God. Ultimately, you're living your life in a faith that this thing that I'm serving is worthy of glory, and that when I die, the consequences of how I've lived and what I've served are going to play out, whether it be heaven, whether it be hell, whether it be, we just cease to exist. Everyone lives by a faith, and you're putting your faith that how you're living is the right, is how it should be done. And if you get the sense that it's not how it should be done, then you begin seeking, you begin wanting to change. So in this critical theory, they have so deified this idea of supremacy of I don't even know, like, equality, not even equality. They're not looking
equity.
Equality.
They want equity.
Yes, equity. So they have deified equity, and to the point they are living their life in faith that service of equity is the thing that is going to grant them peace post death or in life. And to the point where equity has been, violated, then they must atone for the sins of that equity. So yes, it is very religious. It has all the hallmarks of any other religion. And yeah, I would say that they serve their God fervently, many of them.
And their God is equity. Would you agree with that?
That's off the top of my head, so I'm not gonna die on that hill. But ultimately, what I'm thinking now,
I'm not going to die on any hill. I just wanted to get your perspective on the issue. So, you're up, down under. Let's see what you got to say.
Well, I completely I agree with everything you said just there. I wanted to add to it though as well. I don't know if it's the same in America, but I know in Australia churches are tax exempt. Is it the same for you guys in America?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so the way I see it is that it's hilarious that these people who say that churches shouldn't be tax exempt believe that there should be student debt loan forgiveness for their university degrees in gender studies, race studies, critical race theory, whatever you want to call it. So because that's so important apparently, but at the same time, what the church does isn't that important. So I find that hilarious in the sense that that it is a religion that they don't want to have to pay anything in the sense of student loans and be treated like a church, but the church should pay tax. So I just find that hilarious.
Yeah, everybody wants their piece of the pie, and that is one of the biggest differences between Christianity and all of these other religions. Whereas in something like a critical race theory religion, the success of someone else means that you are failing. And so you claw your way to success and you get what you can, because ultimately, like that says in Ecclesiastes, eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow we die. That's all they have to look forward to is eat, drink, be merry, tomorrow we die. That's the end of life for them. Whereas for the Christian, our success, part of our success is found in the success and joy of others, where we have found this thing that has freed us, given us eternal life, and we want to share that with other people. Like it's not about clawing and getting what we can get. Ultimately, in our religion, we believe that we are unworthy of the grace gift of faith that we have gotten. We didn't deserve it. We weren't good enough to do it. We weren't good at all to do it. It was Christ who gave it freely. And so the success of other people is part of our success as well. And I think that's one thing that you will miss from these more take God out of it religions, atheistic, if you will. These atheistic founded religions like critical theory, any of the wokeisms out there, is their success depends on the failure of someone else.
I agree with that. One of my favorite things that I like to see, there's a meme that says, if Jesus was alive today, he'd be a socialist. And of course, everyone gets, a lot of right-wing people. I hate that term, but a lot of Christians get upset about that. A lot of more Judeo-Christian, which do tend to be a little more on the right than the left for the most part, get upset. But I regard it in a different way when they say stuff like that. And so one of the things I like to do is go, "You're right." And they go, "Oh, you agree with me?" "Yeah, absolutely." And they go, "Well, how?" And I say, "He'd also be a communist. He'd also be a capitalist. He'd also be," because he was God of everyone. It doesn't matter their ideology. And so, sure, why not? He would be all of those things,
The thing is, because humans are fallen, no ideology is perfect. So Jesus takes elements from each ideology to find the most perfect one. Humans can't find that because we're not perfect. So what we believe isn't going to align with the Bible 100%.
Right.
So it's the matter. It's the fact that Jesus is above that. He knows what is perfect, and we don't. So we shouldn't try and compare ourselves to and say, "Oh, he was a socialist." End of story, because that would say that socialism is perfect, but it's not, because nothing man-made can be perfect.
No, that's why they say that he was of man and of God. He is, physically he was of man, but spiritually he is of God. He is the elite, like the elite. Like none of us will ever reach that target, but our goal is to get as close as possible.
Yeah. Fully God, fully man. The term you're looking
at. Oh yeah, fully God, fully man. Sorry.
Called hypostatic union. There's the term for you. The problem that I have with the meme is saying he would be a socialist. Anytime you add that ist on the end of it in the English language, that means that you embody that belief system. Socialism, by definition, requires force. It's not, communism requires force. Republicanism requires force. Democrat requires force. All of these beliefs require force, and one of the things that God does not do is he does not force. He will sometimes compel, but he will not force. So to say that God was a socialist, he would not have his apostles take a gun, point it at someone's head, and say, "Give me your money." Now, are there bits of socialism that he encourages us to do? Yes, to share our abundance with other people, to share of the blessings that he's given to us, but it was all voluntary. Even the tithe, you can say 10%. Technically, in the Old Testament, it was around 22%. But the tithe that
there weren't taxes then.
Yeah, but the tithe, the tithe was voluntary. It still is voluntary. It's certainly not a cardinal doctrine. You don't go to hell for not. So that's again why I'm drawn more towards a libertarian belief system, because we are built off of voluntary action. And again, it's not perfect. Liberty Down Under said it great. Only God is perfect. Libertarianism is not perfect. Anarchism is not perfect. None of these are. We will only be perfect when we go to heaven and are like Christ. And
Yeah.
until then, you strive to, well, what is the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy him forever. And that's the goal.
Right. I agree with that. Let's see. One thing that I have noticed, and I guess this can be our final our wrap up subject in this, is that my entire life, but it got worse in my teenage years, and it's only gotten worse since, is the absolute routing of church and state. And so basically, I mean, when I was in elementary school, we had teachers that would say, "Hey, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, or you can take a moment of silence. You can pray, whatever you want." Right? That's kind of how it went. Then in high school, that kind of started to shift to where, yeah, I mean, kind of a little bit. My son now, he got actually suspended from school for sitting down during the Pledge of Allegiance and praying when the teacher asked. Now, to be honest, I think he was just being a shithead because that's my son. But my point being is that that's what he said he was doing, and he got suspended for doing so.
Yeah.
The assault on religion, yeah, like they've taken this argument of separation of church and state. I know this doesn't affect you probably as much, Liberty, but in America, at least, it's a massive problem. I could see it spreading real easy around everywhere. The assault on religion in general, in especially any state-based situation, to the point that if you're on government property, you're not allowed to be religious in any way, I think has gotten exponentially worse in my lifetime, almost to a point now that they've threatened to put people in jail, which is crazy because I'm like, that's persecution, like any way you look at it. So, Liberty, thoughts?
Well, so we in Australia we have Constitution Section 106. I think it's 116. Says that we have a separation of church and state in that the Commonwealth government can't make any law favouring or discriminating against any religion. Recently, in 2017, we had the gay marriage plebiscite, which was a big issue in Australia, and in the end, gay marriage got passed. It was one of the only times in Australia we've had voluntary voting because we have mandatory voting system, and it was an overwhelming majority. I think it was 60-something% of people said to have gay marriage, and then from that, the federal parliament then amended the Marriage Act to allow for same-sex marriage. But the whole situation was gays against the church, and we had a massive split around that. And the way I see it is that I'm personally opposed to same-sex marriage, but, and I always have to say this, but there's a reason for that, in that the state shouldn't say you can or cannot marry someone. That's not the state's job. The way I see it is that we should have a civil union done by the state. If anything, the state should do a civil union, and then marriage is through the church.
Yep.
Right.
That way, churches get to keep their religious beliefs, and the gay community gets equality with the rest of the world. That's the way I see it, because they want to have equality and not be discriminated against, which is why you allow everyone to have a civil union. And then the church, if they agree to doing a marriage ceremony, will do the marriage ceremony with the then married couple. So it's entirely up to the discretion of the church as to whether or not they marry a couple, which means that everyone gets the same treatment, basically. So that's the way I see it. But yeah, we definitely have separation of church and state, at least federally. We don't have a Bill of Rights, so it's only then through the Constitution, which only applies federally. So there's a bit of a debate as to whether or not it applies at the state level as well, because we have I think 2 states of Bill of Rights, and we have no federal Bill of Rights. So it's still up in the air as to how we resolve that, but it's definitely a big issue in Australia. But obviously not as big as in America, because we don't have the same sort of like Pledge of Allegiance or anything like you guys have over there. So it's definitely, from what I've seen, it's much more of an extreme issue over in America.
Well, our Pledge of Allegiance is actually to the actual total nation, as the, and the I guess easiest way to put it is the federal side of it. But I believe, and maybe Paul knows better than me, of the 50 states, all 50 states have their own constitution, as well as then the federal side, we have the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, if I'm remembering this correctly.
Yes, each state has their own I was just listening to a podcast about it today. Every state, in fact, has the right to secede if they want to. Federal government has been trying to make that more difficult, but the whole point of being a federal government is we can come and go as we please.
Yeah, because we're basically, the way it was designed was that every state would be a sovereign nation. And then to be part of the union, they would say, okay, we'll follow we'll fall under your constitution and your Bill of Rights to be part of this union, but we do retain that right to go, yeah, we don't want to, and we don't bounce.
That was something that even, I think it was James Madison against quite a bit, was, that should the federal government do anything that Virginia doesn't like, Virginia will cut bait and run. Obviously, it didn't happen. In answer to your question,
no, that did happen once, and then Abraham Lincoln fucking attacked the shit out of half the country. So yeah, no, it happened. So that has happened. Hamilton was right.
Oh, yeah, no, West Virginia should not exist. So yeah, in answer to your question, the state itself is one of those godless governments or godless religions, and the state and godless religions do not like competition. So I'm actually one of the people who would be fine with A, not having Pledge of Allegiance in a class, and B, religion, I mean, technically education as well, but religion and education is the job of a parent. And so the parent should be praying with the child. The parent should be the one in charge of education. And obviously they're going to farm that out and say, okay, here's the teachers that know best. And then we have public education, which, having taught in it, wow, what a fiasco there. I am not comfortable with the school leading prayer or directing prayer. I am very comfortable with the child having the freedom to pray whenever they want to. Prayer is not something that you have to get in a certain position. So your eyes can be open sitting at your desk. You can pray if you want to. Nobody can stop you. But yes, the attack on the outward display of religion, honestly, I think comes from the government, the state being jealous. They don't like the competition that Christianity gives it, because Christianity ultimately challenges its power. We're going to see it ramped up a ton, like Canada, that third pastor that just got arrested from the church that was kicking him out. By
the way, all of those men to me are heroes.
Oh, big time. So we will see that here shortly, before long.
I don't think it'll be as safe to arrest pastors in America.
I think we will see it in our lifetime. They will find a way to vilify it. Hopefully, the Liberty Communion will go guns blazing and help them out. But
he meant that metaphorically, you do.
Of course, yes, metaphorically, totally.
I agree with you, and I hope so, because look, I mean, I often wonder myself, and I don't know, maybe I'll get you guys' thoughts on this before we let you plug your stuff. I often wonder about this myself, is that my entire life I've watched the right or Republicans or conservatives or whatever just fold and fold and fold and fold. You know, one of the things that Tim Pool likes to say, and I agree with him, is that the left, the Democrats will go, hey, we're going to burn down the house. And the Republicans go, whoa. Can we just burn down the kitchen? They don't actually do anything, right? Like to stop anything. They don't push back, honestly. They just kind of whatever. I often wonder to myself, what will it take for the right to literally go, that is enough? and we mean it, and not from the political side of the politicians saying it. I mean the people going, that's enough. No more. We're done. Y'all, I mean, I don't know where that line is, because they constantly just, I mean, to use the Bible here, turn the other cheek.
I will answer that question when I plug my book, because that's
perfect.
the most perfect thing to do it.
Well, we just hit an hour, so we are going to let Liberty Down Under plug whatever he's got going on. I'm trying to convince the guy to get himself up and going with his own show, where he's gonna like talk to us about what's going on in fucking Europe and Australia. But you know, what do you got going on, buddy?
Well, look, I've been on this podcast so many times now. I might as well not do my own podcast and just come here permanently almost.
At this
You've had me on,
point,
what,
he's
4 times
basically
now?
the co-host. Like,
You've had me on, what, 4 or 5 times now, I think?
four times now, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, just check me out at Twitter at libertydown underspelled UNDR, because Twitter likes to have short usernames.
Nice. Right on. Yeah, he's pretty good, but I'll convince him that he needs his own show, or he can just start co-hosting this one. I don't care, whatever. It's all good. All right, Paul, you have a great new book. It's coming out very soon. I'm still waiting for my copy so I can proofread it and see if it's any good.
I'm still waiting for my copy.
All right, plug your shit, man.
It's in the design phase, so sometime this next week I'll get my first sort of reader's copy back. Yeah, the book is called Drosselmeyer, Curse of the Rat King. It's a prequel to the Nutcracker, and I started writing it on 15 Days to Flatten the Curve, and you know, over a year later now, we're almost getting to the place where it's published. But it really is about what happens when powerful people begin stepping on the weak. And in answer to your question, what will it take for people to stand up and say enough is enough? It will take a single voice standing up and saying no.
Tiananmen Square.
Tiananmen Square. That's what it takes. It takes a Tiananmen Square. Nobody wants to be the first one. And it just takes someone, you know, and basically that's the storyline where, you know, the very unsuspecting hero finally just has to stand up and say no, timely. But look me up on Twitter. I am THCL, the Harry Chester Libertarian Official, THCL Official. My other account got nuked. Watch for my book, Drosselmeyer, Curse of the Rat King, coming out. And if you want to hear some of my tunes, look me up on YouTube at PT as in part-time Superman.
Awesome. I will link all of that in the description below. I hope you all enjoy this particular show. It was a little outside of what I usually do, so you're welcome.